Settle in and do not look away. This entire story is a single chilling journey that is best experienced in full. If you appreciate tales of the supernatural, show your support by subscribing. It lets us know you want more. Now, listen closely. Then gone inside. If the pattern held, tonight he would cross the field. Tomorrow morning, he would stand at the fence. The day after, in the yard. The day after that, at the back door. And eventually, inside. The thought made my chest constrict. I grabbed a notebook from the kitchen drawer and started writing. Day 1, field, far. Day 2, field, closer. Day 3, yard. Day 4, field, my position. Today, day 5, field, exact replication. If the progression continued, day 6, fence. Day 7, yard, my replication. Day 8, back door. Day 9, I stopped writing, because day 9 would mean he stood inside the house, where I had stood the night before, which meant if I didn't break the pattern, he would eventually occupy every space I had occupied, one day behind, like a shadow delayed by 24 hours. I felt dizzy, sat down at the kitchen table, stared at the wall. If he was one day behind me, then what happens when he catches up? Does he stop? Do we merge? Does one of us replace the other? And which one is real? The question landed harder than the rest. Which one is real? I walked back to the window. He was still there, unmoved. But I had a sudden, terrifying thought. What if he wasn't copying me? What if I was copying him? What if yesterday, when I walked into that field, I felt compelled to stand there, compelled to hold that posture, because I had already seen him do it the day before? What if the sequence didn't start with me? What if it started with him, and I had simply followed the template without realizing it? I tried to remember the first day clearly, the very first time I saw him. Had he been farther out than I thought? Had I ever walked to that exact initial spot before noticing him? My memory felt slippery, like it had been edited. The house creaked softly as the temperature shifted. I flinched. Every sound felt suspect now. Because if he truly was one day behind, then he knew this house. He would know it intimately. Tomorrow, the realization crawled under my skin. I turned away from the window again. I couldn't keep watching him all day. I needed to function, to think, to test something. If he was following my exact physical movements one day later, then what if I disrupted the pattern? What if I did something unexpected? Something I'd never done before? I walked to the center of the living room, raised my right arm straight into the air, held it there, waited. Nothing happened. Of course, nothing happened. he wouldn't copy it until tomorrow. Unless he wasn't bound to the day delay anymore. The possibility made my pulse spike. I lowered my arm slowly. I walked to the hallway mirror, stared at my reflection, my posture, my face, my head tilted slightly. I straightened immediately. I didn't want to give him new habits to adopt. By late afternoon, the sky darkened again. Cloud cover rolled in. The field beyond the fence looked flatter, more muted. He was still there, waiting. As sunset approached, I felt dread building in my chest. Because tonight, if the sequence continued, he would cross from that exact replication spot toward the fence. Replaying my walk from yesterday, step by step, and I would not see it happen, just as I hadn't seen it before. He would advance during absence, during sleep, during distraction, during the moments I looked away. I locked every door before nightfall, closed every blind, turned off every light except one small lamp in the living room. I didn't want to be silhouetted. I didn't want him to see me clearly. Around 10 p.m., I couldn't resist. I lifted the corner of the blind just enough to peer through. The field was darker now. Clouds swallowed the moon, but I could still see him faintly, standing in my former position, unmoving. And then, for the first time, I saw it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. His head shifted, just a fraction, just enough to adjust alignment with the window. But I had been watching. I had not looked away. And he moved. Not smoothly, not naturally. It wasn't a turn, it was a repositioning, like someone dragging a marker slightly across a screen. My breath caught. He could move while I watched. The rule had changed. Or maybe I had misunderstood it from the beginning. The blind trembled slightly in my fingers, and slowly, very slowly, his right arm began to rise, mirroring the exact motion I had made earlier in the living room. Not tomorrow. Now. One day behind had become hours. Hours had become minutes. The delay was shrinking. And as his arm lifted, stiff and mechanical, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The closer he got to the house, the faster he was learning. The space between the windows. I didn't sleep the night his arm moved. I stayed in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch with the lamp on beside me, staring at the narrow gap in the blinds where I had seen him raise his arm. It hadn't been fluid. It hadn't been human. It was as if the motion existed in segments, a repositioning rather than a lift. But it was intentional, and it was synchronized. He hadn't waited until tomorrow. He had shortened the delay. That meant the distance between us wasn't just physical. It was temporal. And it was collapsing. Around 2 a.m., I forced myself to look again. The field was nearly invisible under the cloud cover, but I could make out the silhouette faintly. His arm was down again, both arms at his sides, as if nothing had happened. As if the last 3 hours were just my mind stitching fear into darkness. I whispered, "Stop copying me." The words sounded small in the room, unanswered. I waited for him to react. He didn't, but the feeling of being studied intensified. It's hard to explain that sensation, the certainty that something is not just looking at you, but measuring you, cataloguing, breaking you into patterns. I stood up slowly and moved toward the hallway mirror. If he was accelerating, if the delay was shrinking, then I needed to know whether the replication only occurred in the field or everywhere. I stood in front of the mirror and tilted my head slightly to the left, held it, waited. Nothing changed. My reflection stayed perfectly aligned with me. Of course it did. I exhaled shakily. "You're losing perspective," I muttered. I lowered my head, and for just a fraction of a second, my reflection didn't. It stayed tilted. I blinked hard. It snapped back into place instantly. Perfect synchronization. My heart slammed against my ribs. "No," I whispered. "Number. Mirrors are tricks of light. They don't lag. They don't hesitate." But I had seen it. A delay, less than a second, but real. I stepped backward slowly. The reflection stepped with me, this time perfectly in sync. I reached out and touched the glass. Cold, solid, normal. I forced myself to breathe evenly. Lack of sleep can cause micro-hallucinations. I'd read about that once. Visual stutters, brief misalignments, the brain filling gaps incorrectly. That had to be it. It had to be. I turned off the hallway light and walked back into the living room. The space felt tighter than it had the day before. Walls closer, ceiling lower. Or maybe that was just my mind constricting. At 3:14 a.m, my phone buzzed again. Same time as before. No notification, no alert, just a brief vibration. The screen remained dark. I stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. No new messages, no updates, nothing. But when I unlocked it, the camera app was open. I was certain I hadn't opened it. The last image displayed was from earlier that night. The field, the silhouette. I felt my throat close. I hadn't taken that photo. The timestamp read 3:13 a.m, 1 minute before the vibration. I zoomed in. The image was darker than the others, grainier, but he was closer, much closer. Standing not in the field, not at the fence, but in the yard again, directly beneath my bedroom window. I dropped the phone onto the couch. That wasn't possible. I had checked. I had looked. He was still in the field. Unless he moved when I looked away from the window earlier. Unless the pattern wasn't linear anymore. I ran upstairs, heart pounding. I pulled the bedroom blind aside quickly. The yard was empty, the fence visible, the field stretching beyond it. No silhouette, no shape, nothing. I scanned left, right, slowly. Still nothing. I opened the photo again with trembling fingers. He was there in the image, in the yard,
beneath this exact window, looking up, the angle of his head slightly raised, as if aware of the camera above him, as if aware of me. I checked the metadata. It said it was taken from my phone, from inside the house, facing outward, at 3:13 a.m., which meant at some point tonight, I had stood at this window, lifted my phone, taken a picture of him in the yard, and I didn't remember doing it. A cold wave of realization slid through me. What if the replication wasn't only external? What if it wasn't just him copying me? What if I was copying him without knowing it? I stepped back from the window slowly. The house felt wrong now, less like shelter, more like an environment being tested, mapped. I went downstairs again, moving quietly without thinking about why I was being quiet. I didn't want to alert something. I don't know what, just something. I turned on the television for noise. Static filled the room before the channel loaded. In that half second of static, I saw him, standing behind me, in the reflection of the dark screen. I whipped around. The room was empty. I turned back to the television, normal programming, no reflection except my own. I muted the volume, the silence pressed in again. Then I noticed something else. In the reflection, my posture, it looked slightly delayed. Not by much, but when I lifted my hand slowly, the reflection followed just a fraction too late, less than half a second, but noticeable. My breathing quickened. No, I whispered again. I stepped closer to the screen. The reflection corrected itself instantly. Perfect alignment. I laughed softly, a brittle sound. This is exhaustion. That had to be it. Sleep deprivation distorts perception. It plays tricks. It stretches time. I hadn't truly slept in days. That's all this was. But then, the television flickered. The image distorted briefly, and in the distortion, I saw him, standing in the space between the screen and the wall. Not reflected, present, just for a frame, then gone. I stumbled backward, knocking over the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room. The only light came from the television, flickering, unstable. I didn't move, didn't breathe. And in the black edges of the room, in the glass of framed photos, in the microwave door in the kitchen, I saw hints of him. Not solid, not fully formed, but present, in reflections, in surfaces that bounced light. He wasn't confined to the field anymore. He was in the space between windows, between layers, in the thin barrier where image becomes reality. I stood very still, afraid that movement would invite imitation, afraid that stillness would too. My phone buzzed again. I didn't look at it. I didn't want to see another photo I didn't remember taking. Instead, I walked slowly to the bathroom, turned on the light, faced the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, pale, tired, eyes ringed with dark shadows. I leaned closer, studied the details.
the faint stubble on my chin, the redness in my eyes, the subtle tremor in my lower lip. I whispered, "You're still you." The reflection whispered it back, perfectly synchronized. I exhaled slowly, and then the light flickered, just once, and in that flicker, the reflection's mouth didn't move. Mine did, but his didn't. It stayed closed, eyes locked on me, watching, independent. The light stabilized immediately. The reflection resumed perfect alignment. But I had seen it. I had seen him inside the mirror, wearing my face, studying my movements, learning the mechanics. The house creaked again, a deeper sound this time, from the hallway. I turned slowly. The door to the bedroom upstairs was open. I was certain I had closed it. A thin line of darkness stretched beyond it, inviting. I didn't want to go up there, but I had to know. Each step up the staircase felt heavier than the last. The air near the top was colder, thinner. I reached the hallway and stopped. The bedroom door stood open. The blinds were slightly raised, just enough to look through. I stepped closer and looked out into the yard. He was there, not in the field, not at the fence, in the yard, standing exactly where I had stood the night before when I first noticed him there. Arms at his sides, head tilted, facing the window, facing me. The delay had shortened completely. There was no more day behind, no more sequence. He was almost synchronized. And as I watched, very slowly, he began to lift his hand toward the window, mirroring the exact way I was lifting mine in that moment. I froze. He froze. We stood there, two figures, separated by glass, separated by something thinner than glass. And I understood something then with terrible clarity. He wasn't trying to reach the house. He was trying to reach the position, the final alignment, the moment when our movements overlapped completely, when there was no delay left. And if that happened, if he moved exactly when I moved, if he stood exactly where I stood, then one of us wouldn't need to exist anymore. The distance shrinks. I stopped thinking of him as a man that morning. That might sound like denial. It wasn't. It was adjustment. Because men breathe. Men shift their weight. Men blink. Men leave footprints you can measure and follow and explain. What stood in my yard no longer obeyed those rules, and what stared at me from the mirror the night before certainly didn't. I didn't sleep after seeing him raise his hand toward the window. I stayed in the bedroom chair, positioned deliberately out of direct sight of the glass. I didn't want to test synchronization again. Didn't want to accidentally move in a way that invited imitation. Every small action now felt instructional. If I scratched my arm, was I teaching him to scratch? If I turned my head, was I teaching him how to turn? That thought crawled under my skin and stayed there. Around 6 a.m., pale grey light seeped through the blinds. I didn't rush to look. I didn't want to confirm what I already knew. But eventually, I stood, walked to the window, and pulled the blinds up fully. The yard was empty. The fence stood still. The field beyond it stretched cold and colourless under the winter sky. For a brief moment, relief flooded through me so intensely my knees nearly buckled. Maybe it had peaked. Maybe whatever was happening had burned itself out. Maybe the synchronization had reached its limit and dissolved. I stepped closer to the glass, scanned the field carefully. No silhouette, no movement, no dark shape against the frost. Nothing. I allowed myself to breathe. I even let out a short, humourless laugh. "You see," I said quietly, "you're still here." I turned away from the window and froze. The bedroom door was closed. I was certain I had left it open. I stared at it for a long moment. The wood looked normal, the handle unmoving, the hallway silent beyond it. But something about the angle felt wrong, slightly misaligned, like the geometry of the house had shifted half an inch overnight. I approached the door slowly and opened it. The hallway was empty, quiet, cold. I stepped out and looked down toward the staircase. Nothing. I walked downstairs carefully, listening for any sound that wasn't mine. The living room looked undisturbed. The lamp I had knocked over earlier was still on the floor. The television was off. The blinds remained closed. Everything exactly as I'd left it, except the back door. It was unlocked. I never leave it unlocked. Not out here. Not ever. I felt my pulse in my throat. I walked toward it slowly, touched the handle. Cold, solid, real. I opened the door just enough to look outside. The yard was quiet, still, but the frost near the steps, it was disturbed, not flattened like before, not a straight path this time. Circular, as if someone had stood directly outside the door, turning slowly in place. I stepped onto the porch. The air hit my face sharply. I scanned the yard again. Still empty, but the circular marks were clear now. Boot-shaped impressions, overlapping, pivoting, facing the house, facing the door, facing where I stood. I crouched down to examine them. The prints were shallow but distinct. The tread pattern looked familiar. My stomach tightened. I glanced down at my own boots. Same size, same wear pattern on the outer edge of the heel. No, that didn't mean anything. Lots of boots look similar. I stood quickly and stepped backward. One of the prints overlapped perfectly with the bottom of my own, as if placed deliberately for comparison, as if to show me. The air felt thinner suddenly, harder to breathe. I looked out toward the fence, and that's when I noticed it. The fence gate. It was slightly open, just a few inches. I hadn't touched it yesterday. I was certain. I never use the gate. I climb over near the corner where the wire is loose. I walk toward it slowly, each step heavy, measured. The frost cracked under my boots loudly, announcing me. The gate creaked faintly in the wind. I reached it and touched the metal, cold enough to sting. The latch was undone, deliberately. I pushed it open further and stepped into the field. The air out there felt different now, denser, as if the land itself was holding its breath. I scanned the ground carefully and saw it immediately. 2 sets of tracks, one from yesterday leading to where I had stood, and another, fresh, from the fence, outward, following the exact line I had taken yesterday when I walked into the field. But the spacing was wrong. The stride length was slightly longer, the steps slightly straighter, more precise. I followed them, each print crisp in the frost. They led to the spot where I had first stood 2 days ago, then continued beyond it, farther into the field, toward nothing. I walked slowly along the path, my heart beating too loudly in my ears. The tracks didn't stop where I had stopped. They went past it. Another 10 yards, then 20, then 30, until they reached a spot in the field I had never visited, and there they ended. No turning, no circling, just stopped. As if the person walking had simply ceased to exist mid-step. I stared at the final print for a long time. The next step should have been directly ahead, but there was nothing, just untouched frost, smooth, unbroken. I swallowed hard, and slowly, very slowly, I became aware of something else. The silence. Not the normal rural quiet, but the absence of even distant sound. No wind, no birds, no hum from the highway miles away. Just a blankness. I turned slowly and saw him, standing at the fence. Not in yesterday's position, not following the delayed sequence. At the fence, watching me, arms at his sides, head tilted, facing my back. My blood ran cold. He wasn't behind in time anymore. He had skipped ahead. I hadn't heard him walk, hadn't seen him cross the yard, hadn't seen him enter the field, but there he was, between me and the house. The distance between us was maybe 40 yards, too far to reach quickly, too close to feel safe. I didn't move. Neither did he. The wind returned softly, brushing across the field. The hum in my ears started again, low, vibrational. He wasn't copying my posture anymore. He was simply standing, watching, waiting. I took one step backward. He did not mirror it. He did not adjust. He stayed perfectly still. I took another step back. Still nothing. That was worse. The copying had rules. This had none. I turned fully toward him, forced myself to look at his face. It was clearer now, still blurred at the edges, but more defined. And I felt something twist in my chest when I realized the features were forming. Subtle lines, contours, the suggestion of a nose, a mouth, a brow, like clay being shaped slowly over time, using me as reference. The head tilt was less exaggerated now, more natural, more like mine. He was refining, perfecting. The distance between us felt fragile, like thin glass ready to crack. I realized suddenly, he had led me here. The tracks beyond my original position, they weren't replication, they were invitation. He had extended the path, tempted me farther from the house, farther from walls, farther from reflections, into open space where there was nothing between us but air. I stepped backward again, slowly, toward the house, toward the fence. He did not block my path, did not advance. He simply watched. When I reached the fence, I didn't take my eyes off him as I climbed over. The metal bit into my palm. The yard felt smaller now, less protective. I stepped inside and closed the gate firmly, latched it, turned around. He was still in the field, but closer than before. Not by walking, by adjustment, as if the space between us had compressed. I stumbled backward toward the house. My heel caught on the porch step. I nearly fell, and in that instant, he was at the fence. Not walking, not running, just there. The air snapped tight in my lungs. I scrambled up and backed toward the door. He stood inches from the wire now, studying the yard, studying the house, studying me. His face, it looked more complete, more structured, and terrifyingly more familiar. I saw my own jawline forming, my own brow, even the faint scar near the temple I'd gotten as a teenager. I fumbled with the door handle and got inside, locked it, pressed my back against the wood. Through the small window at the top of the door, I could see him still at the fence, not trying to climb it, not testing it, just observing, measuring. The distance had shrunk too fast. The delay was gone. The mimicry was gone. Now it was something else. Assimilation. I realized with cold certainty he wasn't trying to follow me anymore. He was trying to replace the gaps, the places where I wasn't, the moments I wasn't looking, the spaces between windows, between reflections, between breaths, and eventually between heartbeats. Outside at the fence, he lifted his head slightly, and for the first time, I saw his eyes clearly. They were my eyes, but empty, as if the depth behind them hadn't been filled in yet. as if he was waiting for something to transfer. And slowly, very slowly, he reached for the gate latch. His hand closed around the latch, not hurried, not forceful, just precise, like someone performing a task they had already practiced 100 times. I watched from inside the door, my back pressed against the wood, barely breathing. The metal made a soft click as the latch lifted. That small sound echoed louder than any scream. The gate swung inward. He didn't step through immediately. He paused, head tilted slightly, as if listening. As if measuring the interior of the yard the way he had measured the field. I stumbled backward into the kitchen. Every instinct told me to run. But run where? Out here, the nearest house is half a mile down the road. Open land in every direction. There were no neighbours close enough to hear shouting, no traffic noise to drown footsteps. Just space. And now, him. I grabbed the phone from the counter and dialed Harold without thinking. It rang twice, 3 times, 4. Hello? Harold, I said, my voice already shaking. He's in my yard. Who is? The man, the one I told you about. Silence, then a slow exhale. You still on that? I'm not joking. He opened the gate. There was a pause long enough to make my chest tighten further. Inna. He stopped himself. Sorry, son. There ain't anybody out there. He's here. You want me to drive over? I hesitated. If Harold came and didn't see him, what would that mean? Or worse, what if Harold did see him? What if there were 2 of them? No, I said finally. Just stay inside. What? Just stay inside today. I hung up before he could respond. The house was silent again. Too silent. I walked slowly toward the living room window and lifted the corner of the blind just enough to see. He had stepped into the yard. He stood exactly where I had stood earlier that morning when I first noticed the circular prints. Perfect alignment. Perfect memory. His movements were smoother now, less segmented, less mechanical. The refinement was accelerating. He turned his head slightly toward the house, toward the living room, toward me. Even though I was barely visible behind the curtain, he knew. He always knew. I stepped back immediately. The hum in my ears returned, stronger, lower, resonating in my teeth. He was close enough now that the pressure felt physical. I walked backward through the living room until I hit the hallway wall. I didn't want to watch him cross the yard. Didn't want to witness the distance closing again, because witnessing seemed to matter. Observation seemed to tighten the connection. The floorboards creaked faintly. I froze. That sound hadn't come from beneath my feet. It came from the back of the house, near the kitchen, near the door. A soft weight shifting. I swallowed hard and moved slowly toward the kitchen entrance. The back door was still closed, still locked, but the small upper window, the shadow outside had shifted. He was no longer centered in it. He was closer, right up against the glass. I forced myself to look and immediately wished I hadn't. His face was inches from the window, clearer than ever, defined, structured, nearly complete. My face, my exact features, the scar near the temple, the faint crease at the corner of the mouth, even the uneven eyebrow on the right side. But the eyes were hollow, not black, not glowing, just depthless, like a placeholder waiting to be filled. He wasn't breathing. There was no fog forming on the glass, no condensation. He simply hovered there, studying. Then, slowly, he raised his hand, pressed it flat against the window. I looked down involuntarily. My own hand had lifted. I hadn't realized it. I was mirroring him now, not the other way around. My palm hovered inches from the glass inside, matching his position perfectly. My chest tightened with panic. I tried to lower my arm. It resisted, not physically restrained, but heavy, like pushing against thick water. His fingers twitched slightly, and mine did too. Not by choice, but by compulsion. I forced my arm down with a sudden jerk, staggered backward. He didn't lower his hand immediately. There was a delay, a short one. Then his arm dropped too. The delay was back, but reversed. I stumbled into the hallway, my breathing uneven, my heart racing so hard it hurt. He wasn't copying me anymore. I was copying him. The pattern had inverted, and that meant something worse than pursuit. It meant control. The hum intensified. I pressed my hands over my ears. It didn't help. The vibration felt internal now, inside the skull, inside the chest. I realized suddenly, the mirrors, the reflections, they weren't distortions. They were rehearsals. He had been practicing inside surfaces, inside thin barriers, learning depth, learning delay, learning alignment. And now, he didn't need distance anymore. He only needed synchronization. The back door handle rattled once, not violently, just a small test. I didn't move. The handle rattled again, then stopped. Silence, thick and suffocating. I forced myself to step forward again, to look, because not looking hadn't helped before. I approached the kitchen slowly. Each step felt like wading through resistance. I peered through the upper window again. He was gone. The porch was empty. The yard still. The gate open. My stomach dropped. I turned slowly. The hallway mirror caught my eye.
and I saw him, standing behind me, inside the reflection, perfectly solid, perfectly aligned. But when I spun around, the hallway was empty. I looked back at the mirror. He was still there, standing where I had been seconds ago, head tilted, studying my movements, testing delay. I stepped to the side. My reflection moved with me. He did not. He remained in his position inside the mirror, independent, learning. The distance wasn't shrinking physically anymore. It was shrinking dimensionally. The gap between real and reflected, between action and imitation, between self and duplicate. The hallway light flickered once, and for a fraction of a second, my reflection wasn't mine. It was him, fully formed, fully me. Eyes filled now, not hollow, not empty, just calm and certain. The light steadied. My reflection returned, but I knew what I had seen. He didn't need to break the door. He didn't need to cross the yard. He didn't need to open windows. He was already inside. Not in flesh, not yet, but in surface, in repetition, in the small delays between movement and image. And as I stood there staring at the mirror, I felt something shift in my chest, a faint hesitation before my next breath, a half-second pause before my next blink, and I understood with rising horror. The delay wasn't shrinking anymore. It was transferring. Soon, when I moved, he wouldn't copy me, and I wouldn't copy him. There would be no delay left at all. There would just be one movement, one body, one version standing in this house, and the other, trapped forever on the wrong side of the glass. I don't know when the delay disappeared completely. There wasn't a dramatic moment, no snapping sound, no sudden blackout. It happened the way frost melts, gradually, invisibly, until you realize the surface has changed. By the time I understood it, it was already too late. I stopped trusting mirrors first. That was easy. I covered them with sheets. Bathroom, hallway, bedroom. I even draped a blanket over the dark television screen. Any surface that could reflect was concealed, because reflections had become rehearsals, and I refused to give him more practice. The house felt smaller without them, less dimensional, but safer. Or at least, I wanted it to be. The yard stayed empty after that day at the fence. The gate remained open, but I didn't close it again. It felt symbolic now, as if barriers had become decorative. He didn't need doors. He didn't need distance. He needed alignment, and alignment had already begun. The first undeniable sign came that evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, when I noticed something wrong with the rhythm of my breathing. It wasn't panic. It wasn't hyperventilation. It was timing. I inhaled, and before I exhaled, I felt the echo of the inhale again. A ghost breath, like someone else inside my chest had tried to breathe with me, just slightly out of sync. I froze, waited, inhaled again, this time deliberately slow. And there it was, a faint second pull of air, half a beat late. My vision blurred briefly. I pressed my hands flat against the table. "Not real," I whispered. But it didn't feel like imagination. It felt like shared space. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in darkness intentionally. If there were no reflections, no glass, no surfaces, then he would have nowhere to stand, nowhere to test movement. But darkness has depth too, and depth has layers. Around midnight, I stood up to get water. The kitchen felt unfamiliar in the dark, like the angles had shifted, like the counters were slightly longer, the hallway slightly narrower. I walked slowly, counting steps in my head. 1, 2, 3. At step 6, I hesitated, because I always reach the sink at step 5. Always. I stopped moving. The sink was farther than it should be. I took one more step. Now it aligned. My stomach dropped. The house wasn't changing. I was. The spacing between my expectations and reality was widening, and something else was filling that gap. I reached the sink and turned on the faucet. The water ran normally, clear, cold. I splashed some on my face, closed my eyes. When I opened them, the reflection in the stainless steel curve of the faucet wasn't covered. I hadn't thought about that surface. It was small, distorted, but reflective. And in it, I saw him. Not behind me, not separate, but slightly ahead of me. The tilt of the head came first, then the shoulders, then the subtle tightening at the corner of the mouth. He wasn't copying me. He was anticipating me. I straightened abruptly. The faucet reflection warped back into useless distortion. But I felt the change internally. A shift. Emerging. I stumbled back into the hallway. Every movement felt watched from the inside. Not from corners, not from windows, but from behind my eyes. I reached the bedroom and closed the door, locked it, sat on the floor with my back against the bed. No mirrors, no windows uncovered, no visible surfaces, just walls, solid, matte, safe. But even with my eyes closed, I could feel posture adjusting. My head tilted slightly to the right without permission. I forced it straight. A pressure pushed gently in the opposite direction. Not forceful, just corrective. Like muscle memory forming. I grabbed my own chin and held it still. My hands trembled. I whispered, "You don't get to do that." Silence. Then a faint shift in breathing again, slightly delayed, then slightly ahead, like someone testing tempo. I didn't realize I'd fallen asleep until I woke up, which doesn't make sense, but that's what happened. One moment I was sitting against the bed, the next I was standing in the field, cold air on my face, frost under my boots, the house in the distance. I didn't remember walking outside. I didn't remember opening doors, but I was there, in the field, in the exact spot where he had first appeared days ago. Arms at my sides, head slightly tilted, facing the house. My heart pounded in slow, heavy beats. I tried to move. My body resisted,
Not frozen, just positioned, as if the stance had been chosen already. The house looked unfamiliar from here, smaller, dimensional, like something viewed through glass. I could see a figure in the bedroom window, watching, standing exactly where I had stood the first morning I noticed him. The silhouette inside the house looked like me, perfectly aligned, perfectly natural, breathing normally, watching calmly. My stomach twisted violently. I tried to lift my arm. It moved, but not when I commanded it. It moved a half second before the intention formed, as if preloaded, as if rehearsed. The figure in the window mirrored it instantly. No delay. Perfect synchronization. The hum in my ears returned, loud, overwhelming. And I understood then. It was never about crossing the field. It was never about entering the house. The field had been distance. The yard had been threshold. The mirrors had been practice. But the true boundary, the real line, had always been perspective. Who stands where? Who watches whom? And which side of the glass defines reality? I wasn't in my house. I was in his. Or maybe I always had been. The figure in the window stepped backward, out of sight. My chest tightened. I tried to run toward the house. My legs moved slowly, heavy, uncertain. Each step felt pre-approved, pre-structured, as if following a path already carved. When I reached the fence, the gate stood open, inviting, familiar. I climbed through. The yard felt smaller than I remembered. The porch closer. The door already unlocked. I stepped inside. The house was silent, dark, empty, except the hallway mirror, uncovered, standing upright, perfectly clean. I approached it slowly and saw him standing inside, not separate, not delayed, just me, complete, solid, eyes filled, calm. I lifted my hand, he lifted his, perfectly synchronized, no delay, no difference. I leaned closer and realized something that hollowed me out completely. The scar near the temple was on the wrong side, reversed. The brow slightly higher, the mouth slightly more relaxed. Tiny corrections, tiny improvements. He wasn't a duplicate. He was an edit, and I was the draft. My breathing faltered. The echo breath inside my chest aligned fully. No second rhythm, just one. I blinked, and when my eyes opened, I was in the bedroom, standing at the window, looking out into the field. There was a figure standing far out there, arms at his sides, head tilted, facing the house, facing me. The frost around his boots undisturbed, the distance vast and empty. I tried to move. My posture held firm, still, balanced, observing. The man in the field lifted his hand slowly. I didn't feel my arm move, but I saw it, faintly reflected in the glass. Perfectly synchronized. No delay. Tomorrow, he will be closer, and I will stand here, watching, learning, waiting. Because now I understand something with perfect clarity. One of us has to stand in the field, and one of us has to watch from the window. And as long as there is distance, there is still a version of me inside the house. Tomorrow, I'm not going outside. It was never the field. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself I would. I turned off every light in the house, sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water I never drank, and watched the back door like a man waiting for a verdict. The field outside was quiet. Too quiet. Not windless. There was wind. I could see it ripple through the tall grass under the moonlight. But there was something wrong with the silence inside the sound, as if the field were performing wind, acting out the idea of movement, not really moving. I kept replaying what I'd realized earlier. He had never been standing in the field. He had been standing where I had stood yesterday. Every position, every location, every time I'd stepped outside and paused, on the porch, by the fence post, near the mailbox, halfway across the field when I'd finally worked up the nerve to walk toward him. That was where he appeared the next day. Always one day behind me. One exact day. Not closer, not random. Precise. If I walked 10 steps into the grass and stopped to tie my shoe, then tomorrow he would be there, in that exact spot, facing my house, facing me. And that meant something else. It meant he wasn't approaching, he was following, or replacing. I went to the living room window at 2:03 a.m. The moon was high, washing everything silver. And there he was. Not in the center of the field, not near the tree line. He was standing just beyond the small dip in the ground about 20 yards from the house. That dip. Yesterday morning, I'd stood there. I'd been trying to convince myself I was losing it. I'd stepped off the porch and walked down the shallow slope into that little depression in the earth. I remember staring back at the house from there, wondering how it looked from a distance. I'd stayed there for maybe a minute. Then I went back inside. Now he stood in that exact hollow, facing the house, facing this window. I pressed my forehead against the glass, my reflection layered over him, my eyes aligned where his should be. I whispered, "What happens when you run out of space?" The wind shifted. The grass moved in a new direction. He didn't. Morning came like a slow infection, grey light bleeding through the curtains. I hadn't moved from the couch. At some point I must have drifted into something that wasn't quite sleep, but wasn't fully awake either. The kind of state where your thoughts feel louder than reality. I went to the back door. I hesitated before unlocking it, because this was the first morning since I'd understood. If I didn't go outside, would he stay there forever? If I froze myself in place, would I freeze him too. I opened the door. The air was colder than it should have been. The hollow in the field was empty. Of course it was, because today was his day to stand where I had stood yesterday, which meant I stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked beneath my weight. Slowly, carefully, I walked down the steps. I felt like I was stepping into wet cement, each movement deliberate, each step a commitment. I walked exactly to the edge of the hollow, and I stopped. I stood there for 1 full minute. Then I turned around and went back inside. That was it. That was the experiment. If I was right, tomorrow he would be standing right here, at the edge of that dip, 1 step closer to the house than he'd ever been, 1 step closer to finishing the path. I locked every door, closed every curtain, and waited. The next morning, I didn't want to look, but I did. I always did. I parted the curtain just enough. He was there, exactly where I had stood, 1 step closer. It's strange how something can move so slowly and still feel like it's sprinting toward you. He was no longer part of the field. He was part of the yard, the space that felt like mine. I backed away from the window. My mind started racing in directions I didn't want it to. If he was always 1 day behind me, then somewhere, 1 day behind him, was another position, and another, and another. How long had this been happening? Had someone stood where I was standing now? Yesterday? I went to the bathroom. I avoided the mirror. I brushed my teeth staring at the wall, but eventually instinct made me look. Just a glance. In the reflection, for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw someone behind me. Not in the room, in the glass. Standing where I had been standing yesterday when I'd washed my hands. I spun around. Nothing. I looked back at the mirror. Just me. But the air felt occupied. That afternoon, I made the mistake of checking my phone, scrolling back through photos, old ones, from the first week I moved in. There I was on the porch, smiling awkwardly for a picture I'd sent to my brother. Behind me, in the field, nothing. Empty grass. I scrolled forward a few days. Another photo. I was standing by the mailbox. Behind me, a faint vertical shape in the distance, too faint to notice at the time, too clear now to ignore. The timeline was wrong. He had been there before I saw him, which meant I had been behind him first. The thought hit me so hard I had to sit down. What if I wasn't ahead? What if I was the one catching up? What if the man in the field wasn't following me? What if I was retracing him? I ran outside without thinking. The field stretched wide and indifferent. No one stood there. I walked to the hollow, stood in it. Then I walked farther, toward where he had first appeared weeks ago, toward the original spot near the tree line. When I reached it, I stopped. I turned toward the house. From here, it looked small, distant, like something that belonged to someone else. I stayed there longer than I should have, long enough for the light to shift, long enough for the wind to change direction twice. Then I went back inside. That night I dreamed, not images, not events, just a feeling of standing, of facing something, of being watched by a house that felt unfamiliar. When I woke up, I was standing at the bedroom window. I don't remember getting out of bed. The field was grey with early dawn, and there, farther out than he had been in days, stood a figure, in the exact place I had gone yesterday, near the tree line, facing the house, facing me. My breath stopped. He had reset. No, he had adjusted. He wasn't moving toward the house anymore. He was moving toward wherever I chose to stand. And yesterday, I had gone back to the beginning, which meant I had just given him more time, more distance, more days. I had extended the path. I sank to the floor. There was no outrunning him, no shortening the distance. Every place I stood became a marker. Every pause became a position. Every decision etched into the field. And he would occupy them, one by one, forever. I understand it now. He isn't chasing me. He isn't approaching. He isn't threatening. He's documenting, living through the positions I abandon, standing where I used to be, holding space I no longer occupy. If he ever reaches the house, if he ever stands on the porch, if he ever occupies the last place I stand, then there will be nowhere left for me to move, and the field will meet someone new. Tomorrow I won't go outside. I won't create another position. I won't extend the path. I'll stay inside. I'll stay still. I'll break the pattern. Because if I don't move, he can't either. Right? It's 11:47 p.m. now. I'm sitting on the floor in the hallway. All the lights are off. I haven't stepped outside today. Not once. I haven't even opened the back door. I'm holding my breath like that might matter. There's something different tonight. A pressure in the air, like the house is leaning inward, like the walls are closer. I hear something. Not footsteps, not knocking, just wood settling, a slow creak from the porch. I didn't go outside today. I didn't. The porch boards creak again, closer to the door. I stay still. If I don't move, he can't move. The doorknob doesn't turn. There's no scratching, no violence, just presence, just weight, standing on the other side, where I stood yesterday, facing inward, facing me. And suddenly I understand the final rule. He doesn't move when I move. He moves when I stop. Tomorrow, I'm not going outside. I'm not moving at all. I'm going to stay right here. And if you ever drive past a house in the middle of a wide, empty field, and you see someone standing in the yard, not moving, facing the windows, don't wave. Don't call out. Don't step closer. Because he might just be one day behind you.
Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. The darkness still hides many secrets, and more mysterious tales are yet to come. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't get lost in the shadows and will be the first to hear them.